I think it's one of those areas that we still call emerging. So clearly, IoT, Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence, and many other new technological developments are already impacting the European economy and society, because we see it every day. But it is true that at the same time, we are monitoring the economy, especially from the point of view of the data economy, but not only. And what we see is that those markets are still emerging. They have a very high growth potential, and indeed they grow fast. But we need to make sure that we have all the right framework conditions, all the right policies in place to actually make them have a very important impact on the economy. So for the moment, we see that, for instance, in Europe, we only have around maybe 10% of companies that could be called intensive data users. So that would mean that all these technologies, such as IoT, for instance, they still have a fairly limited impact on our economy, because they would require a very intensive data usage and a very intensive use of data technologies and database innovation. So on the European level, we think that certainly we can integrate and we can benefit from all these new developments, including blockchain, including IoT and so on. But we're still at a stage where we need to look at the market and see whether there are still any barriers, if there are still any problems, such as uncertainty around certain legal aspects. For instance, with IoT, there's a very important aspect of liability. Who's going to be responsible when something goes wrong in a highly complex connected system, where data is being sent from one place to another, where we have soon robots coming in and performing certain functions. So on the European level, we are currently looking at this and monitoring it and trying to detect any possible barriers, any possible problems where we might need to intervene. But overall, I think it is still, as I mentioned in the beginning, an emerging area. So we need to both look at it and be very quick to react in case there is a problem, because otherwise we will miss out on the opportunities, and the opportunities will be realized somewhere else, in the US, in Japan. So it's a very delicate moment, I think, in the evolution of the European economy, where we really need to make sure that we benefit from all those incredible technological novelties. Yes, indeed. I just mentioned that there are areas of what we would call framework conditions, so certain elements that have to be put in place for the economy to grow smoothly and to really benefit from these technologies. And one of the basic framework conditions for the success of the digital economy, and in my area that would be the data-based economy, is certainly the skills. And as you mentioned, we see that there's still a lack of sufficient number of employees out there in the market with sufficient data skills to be actually able to work with data and to derive benefits out of the data. So we, from the European level, there are certain limitations, in the sense that education in general is primarily an issue for the national governments to deal with. But at the European level, we try to coordinate, and we try to improve this sort of coordination. So we have, with the help of our innovation and research programs, we are trying to launch networks of excellence between research institutions and universities, technical universities, for instance, to allow them to elaborate their curricula, their educational programs in such a way that within a number of years, hopefully very soon, they will be able to release into the market a sufficient number of people with the right skills. Of course, it is a very big challenge, because the world is accelerating, because technologies are accelerating, and the educational programs are not as flexible. But yes, we try to, on our level, to use the research and innovation funding to promote these kind of educational networks, to make sure that we increase the overall level of data skills and data awareness across Europe. Yes, this is a point that is very close to my heart, because I'm precisely now working on in the preparatory phase of this review of the directive on the reuse of public sector information, which we hope to complete next year. And we have a number of areas that we are looking at. Of course, it's a beginning of a process. So it's an impact assessment. We need to see, and we need to find evidence where we would get the biggest benefits with regard to the costs that some of these new interventions can bring. But in general, I might say we are looking at the area, for instance, of expanding the scope of the directive actually to certain bodies which are currently not covered because they do not fulfill the criteria of what the directive calls a public sector body. Nevertheless, they are very similar to public sector bodies and they fulfill very similar functions. This is what we call para-public bodies. So it's mostly in the area of utility, so water provision, electricity, etc., or public transport, where there's a very complex arrangement with regards to the types of entities which operate on these or which fulfill these functions. So they are sometimes private, sometimes they are semi-private, sometimes they are public. So we are trying to see which of those, the whole myriad of entities we could still capture under the PSI directive. We are also looking at further or simplifying the charging rules which are currently in place, with the overall goal obviously being of trying to get rid of charging for the reuse of public sector information, because we have strong evidence showing that the cheaper the public sector information is, the more innovation is based on that data. And then I think this was also covered today at various moments during the conference, the issue of scientific information and research data. So how to streamline, how to make sure that the overall open data framework, in this case the legal framework, would also apply to scientific research, because the reasoning behind is very similar. It's a kind of data which is produced thanks to public funds, thanks to public support. So there should be a way to make sure that this data is then available to the public. And the fourth area of intervention which we are examining is increasing, I would say, the usability of data, because there's one thing is just to publish the data and make it available, but then comes the second question, is making it available how, in which way, in which manner. So of course we are moving towards publishing data by default as machine readable electronic data, but we can go further. We can try to make sure that, for instance, dynamic data is not only available, but it is also available as dynamic data to be able to enable people to create services based on real-time information. So I think there are a couple of areas. Open data in general is a field which is very much influenced by technological change as well. And it is also a path where we have not reached the end. So I would see it as a yet next step in making more information available in Europe, but this is certainly not the last step.